Elias Vance, his face etched with cold austerity, was merely an instrument of justice. Beneath the night, his immaculate collar concealed the chill and the calculating loss spanning years his hair. A deep obsidian was slicked back with an almost unnatural perfection, a small act of defiance against the chaos he carried within. Every strand, every contour of his profile spoke of control. This control was his most potent weapon, the shield he used to deflect the world's endless attempts to strip him bare. The bespoke jacket, a masterpiece of Italian tailoring crafted from the finest charcoal wool, did more than just clothe him. It was a psychological barrier. It hid the compact, coiled readiness of his muscles, the steady, rhythmic beat of a heart that had been irrevocably scarred. And, most importantly, it concealed the deep-seated tension he was trying desperately to hide. The act of concealment was everything. For 20 long years, this night had existed only as a blueprint in the darkest, most unreachable corner of his mind. Every step he had taken, the lucrative, morally ambiguous deals, the alliances built on sand and necessity, the relentless self-discipline, all of it had been a path leading to this single, irrevocable moment. The tension was a coiled viper in his stomach, a tight, burning knot of anticipation and fear that his own resolve might fail him at the critical juncture. He refused to let it surface. He tasted the metallic tang of adrenaline, not fear, he told himself, but pure, focused energy. He pulled the leather gloves tighter over his hands, noting the subtle squeak of the material. These hands, which had once cradled his infant daughter, had spent the last decade learning how to dismantle men and systems. They were steady now, absolutely devoid of tremor, a testament to the endless hours spent in silent, isolated practice. He watched the grand facade of the mansion across the street. It was a fortress of arrogance, built on the suffering of countless victims, a monument to the man he had come to erase. The man he was hunting was named Victor Volkov. Victor, who had been a name whispered in fear in 4 different continents, a ghost in the financial systems of the world, and once upon a time Elias's closest, most trusted associate. Elias had to mentally compartmentalize the raw, scorching heat of his personal vendetta from the clinical precision required for the job. He was not here to rage. He was here to execute. He ran a quick check of his equipment, the small, high-tech communicator discreetly sewn into his jacket lining, the barely perceptible earpiece, the weight of the specialized lockpicking kit tucked into a hidden internal pocket. Every detail was planned, every variable accounted for. The window of opportunity was narrow, a sliver of time between the changing of the private security patrol and Volkov's nightly return from his secluded, heavily guarded club. That window was closing. The air smelled of ozone and the damp earth of late autumn, scents that Elias would forever associate with the beginning of the end. He took a single, slow breath, a meditative action that centered his core, transforming the white-hot emotional pain into cold, hard functionality. He imagined the scene inside the opulent chamber, the dark furniture, the expensive artifacts, the low-wattage lighting, all serving as a backdrop to Volkov's hubris. Volkov believed himself untouchable, shielded by layers of bureaucracy, wealth, and violence. Elias was about to teach him otherwise. The memory, unbidden, surfaced. The last time he saw his family, the fear in his wife's eyes, the casual brutality of Volkov's betrayal. It was a memory designed to burn away any lingering hesitation. Elias clamped down on it instantly. No sentiment, not now. Sentiment was a weakness he could not afford. The cold precision of his bespoke suit, the perfect knot of his tie, the polished surface of his shoes. These were not for style, but for camouflage, a uniform of professional detachment. He started moving. The shadows welcomed him, stretching and folding around his form. His gait was silent, economical, a product of years spent navigating hostile environments. Each step was a commitment, a definitive break from his old life, and a plunge into the new, darker reality he had forged for himself. The faint glow of the streetlights receded, leaving him alone in the embrace of the moonless night. His journey across the meticulously manicured lawn was swift, a ghostly glide toward the heavy stone wall. He didn't rush. Rushing led to mistakes. And mistakes on a night like this were fatal. He felt the rough texture of the wall beneath his gloved hand as he vaulted over it, landing with the grace of a jungle cat. The tension in his core tightened one final time, ready to explode into action. He was inside the perimeter. The air felt different now, heavy with the scent of expensive security chemicals and manicured foliage. He moved toward the back of the house, bypassing the obvious security measures. His target was a specific window on the second floor, a window known to be perpetually unlatched, a flaw in Volkov's otherwise impeccable defense, a tidbit Elias had purchased at ruinous cost from an insider. He reached the drainpipe, a thick metallic conduit that ran the length of the building. With minimal effort and maximum silence, he began his ascent. The weight of 20 years of waiting pressed down on him, but his grip was firm, his purpose absolute. The silence of the night was only broken by the faint, almost imperceptible whisper of his own movement against the cold metal. He ascended, a shadow climbing toward the light of revenge. This was it. The true beginning. With barely a sound, a breath held captive in his lungs, he breached the window and dropped lightly onto the thick Persian carpet. The impact was absorbed completely, leaving no trace of his entry. He was now fully immersed in the private sanctum of the man he was here to destroy. The room was not merely opulent. It was a garish monument to unchecked vice and excess. The walls were lined with dark, rich mahogany panels, polished to a mirror shine that reflected the faint glow filtering in from the single, heavily curtained window. The scent was the first thing that assaulted his senses, an unholy trinity of extravagance. The deep, smoky bouquet of aged Monte Cristo cigars, the rich, slightly sweet aroma of expensive, tanned Italian leather furniture, and an underlying, unmistakable metallic tang, the smell of old, stagnant money. The combination was cloying, almost suffocating, a physical manifestation of Volkov's decadence. Elias allowed himself a fraction of a second to register the disgust, then instantly filed the sensory input away. He was here to work, not to judge the decor. He moved silently across the room, his eyes instantly adjusting to the gloom. The interior was vast, clearly intended as a private study or a withdrawal chamber, far removed from the house's public spaces. Every object was a statement. A crystal decanter of single malt whiskey sat on a mahogany table, catching the faint light. A collection of ancient, likely ill-gotten artifacts lined a shelf. A fireplace, cold now, dominated one wall, flanked by two oversized, intimidating leather armchairs. Elias dismissed them all as distractions. The objective was the safe. He knew its location from his meticulous reconnaissance. A secret Elias had spent months verifying, cross-referencing surveillance reports, construction blueprints, and drunken boasts. It was hidden, as clichés often are, behind a piece of art. His gaze landed on the wall opposite the fireplace. There hung a painting that, even in the dim light, screamed forgery. It was a pathetic imitation of a Claude Monet landscape, an attempt at class by a man who fundamentally lacked it. Volkov likely enjoyed the irony of hiding his criminal wealth behind a cheap imitation of high culture. Elias approached the painting, his movements fluid and precise, like mercury poured across a flat surface. He didn't touch the canvas, but ran his fingers around the edge of the heavy gilded frame, searching for the mechanism. He found the almost invisible seam near the lower right corner, pressed a precise point, and with a soft, mechanical hiss, the heavy painting swung inward on a silent hydraulic hinge, revealing the heart of the matter. There it was. The vault. A slab of reinforced steel set flush into the mahogany paneling. It was a high-grade security safe, built by a German company known for its multi-layered protection systems. Its door was thick, its hinges heavy, and its electronic lock boasted a complex series of biometric and digital safeguards. But Elias had not spent $250,000 to buy the specs just to be deterred by a keypad. He pulled a specialized optical tool from his jacket, its surface dull and non-reflective. He spent several minutes simply observing the lock interface, his mind running simulations, identifying potential vulnerabilities, calculating the time needed for the bypass. The anticipation was now a low, steady hum, replacing the earlier tension. This was his element. This was where the man in the bespoke suit truly came alive, in the elegant, clinical application of superior knowledge to a seemingly insurmountable problem. He was acutely aware of the ticking clock. The security patrol would cycle back in exactly 13 minutes. He had less than half that time to get what he needed and disappear. The memory of the opulent room, the stench of the cigars, and the cheap pretense of the fake Monet would be the only witnesses to his intrusion. He didn't care about the safe's contents. He only cared about the data within. The data that connected Volkov to the tragedy of 10 years ago. The data that was his key to closing this chapter of his life. His gaze lingered on the painting's empty space. It was a symbolic victory already, exposing the lie, revealing the ugly reality hidden behind the facade of beauty. Volkov's greatest weakness was his belief in his own untouchability. The safe represented that hubris, and Elias was about to shatter it, not with explosives, but with cold, hard intellect. He placed his fingertips on the cold, metallic surface of the safe door, feeling the latent energy of the machine. It was a challenge, a final test of his resolve. He was ready. The silence of the room was absolute, broken only by the slight, almost inaudible hum of the safe's internal electronics, a song of pure, high-stakes confrontation. The electronic lock interface of the German safe was sleek, minimalist, and intimidating. It was designed to repel, to intimidate anyone without the specific access codes. Elias ignored the intimidation factor. He unzipped a small flat kit from his inner jacket, revealing an array of specialized tools designed for digital infiltration, not crude lockpicks, but surgical instruments for code breaking. His gloved fingers, precise and steady, began to work. He wasn't relying on brute force or guesswork. He was entering a sequence, a combination he had not merely known, but had carried within his very DNA for over 20 years. It wasn't the factory default, nor was it a recent number. It was an ancient code, something Volkov would have used in a time when he still considered Elias a trusted equal, a time before the betrayal, a time when a specific date held meaning for both of them. Elias closed his eyes for a brief second, allowing the distant memory to surface. The number wasn't a birthday or an anniversary of success. It was the date of the single biggest failure they had shared, a catastrophic operation in Istanbul that had almost ended both their careers. Volkov, in his misplaced sentimentality and superstition, had a habit of using the dates of his greatest failures as the security keys for his most treasured secrets. It was a way of mocking fate, a ritualistic taunt that only Elias, who had shared the trauma of that failure, could possibly have guessed. The fingers began to move, each tap on the specialized interface a deliberate, measured strike. The touch-sensitive pad required a specific, weighted pressure, not merely a light contact. Elias executed the sequence flawlessly. He envisioned the internal workings of the lock, the digital tumblers spinning, the optical sensors verifying the rhythm and the pressure of his touch. The number was long, a multi-digit sequence encompassing day, month, year, and a final personal cipher. The sound of his own breathing seemed deafening in the silence of the room. He held the final digit in place, waiting for the system to process the input, the internal mechanism whirring quietly in deliberation. The weight of 20 years was compressed into this fraction of a second, the span of time since he first met Volkov, and began the slow, inevitable descent into darkness that had led him here. 20 years of observation, of waiting, of calculating the precise moment to strike. The lock let out a soft, almost polite latch. It was a small sound, but in that vast, silent room, it resonated with the power of a thunderclap. It was the sound of an iron curtain falling, the sound of justice finally taking its first deep breath. The digital display blinked once, showing a temporary green light, and then immediately went dark, returning to its default state of silent vigilance. The electronic barrier had fallen. Elias allowed himself a minuscule internal shudder of relief. Not because the task was easy, but because the first, most dangerous layer of Volkov's defense had been breached. This confirmed everything. Volkov was arrogant, predictable, and deeply rooted in his own twisted sense of history. He reached for the heavy chrome handle, his gloved hand closing around the cold, smooth metal. The physical resistance of the door was immense, a final, tangible barrier. He pulled slowly, minimizing the friction and the resulting sound. The metallic scrape was muted, a low, grinding sound of heavily lubricated steel giving way. The safe door swung outward on its reinforced hinges, revealing the shallow, dimly lit cavity within. The stench of stale, air-conditioned air wafted out. He leaned in, his body language shifting from cautious entry to predatory focus. The safe was not deep, designed more for documents and flash storage than large volumes of cash. His eyes immediately went past the few stacks of sealed envelopes and the small unmarked USB drives, searching for the object of his obsession. The sheer concentration required to maintain this level of silence and precision was exhausting, yet he felt strangely energized. He was on the brink. The internal tension was now a focused beam, driving him forward. The code, the forgotten history, the 20 years, it all came down to what lay inside this dark metal box. He reached out, his fingers poised to retrieve his prize. The next stage of the operation had begun. Elias's flashlight, a small beam of tightly focused light, sliced through the gloom of the safe's interior. His first assessment was a flicker of surprise, instantly masked and filed away. Inside, there were no glittering piles of ill-gotten stones, no vacuum-sealed stacks of unmarked banknotes, no cinematic cache of gold bars. The cavity contained only a handful of nondescript envelopes containing bearer bonds and a few high-capacity digital storage devices, and one other thing. His hand went directly to the object, a modest, old leather journal. Its cover was dark brown, the edges distinctly frayed and worn, indicating years of constant handling, travel, and secrecy. It was bound with a thick, almost archaic string, sealed not by a modern digital lock, but by a simple manual brass clasp. In a room obsessed with digital security and high-tech camouflage, this analog relic was the most valuable item of all. It was too old, too humble to be a decoy. He lifted it out, placing it carefully on the edge of the safe, then scanned the rest of the contents. The USB drives could wait. The envelopes were merely collateral. This journal, this tangible record, was the key. He recognized the style instantly. Volkov's signature method of archiving his most sensitive, damning information. The kind that could not be trusted to a cloud server or a hackable hard drive. Paper cannot be deleted remotely. His gloved hand felt the texture of the aged leather, soft and yielding beneath his fingertips, a stark contrast to the cold, rigid metal of the safe. He released the brass clasp, which gave way with a tiny, almost musical clink. He opened the journal, the smell of old paper, dust, and dried ink filling the air, a scent far more potent than the cigars and leather of the room. He began to flip through the pages swiftly, his focused light illuminating the dense handwritten script. Volkov's handwriting was spiky, precise, a reflection of his meticulous, brutal mind. The entries were clearly not in chronological order, but categorized by coded projects, dates, and locations. Elias's eyes, trained to absorb vast amounts of complex information instantly, scanned for the pivotal moment, the critical entry, the thread that would lead him directly to his goal. He wasn't searching for money laundering schemes or smuggling routes. He was searching for a specific name, a single identifier that would connect Volkov's actions to the past tragedy, a name that, if revealed, would destroy Volkov's carefully constructed empire and expose the dark truth behind the incident that had shattered Elias's life 10 years ago. He was looking for the evidence of a deep conspiracy that went far beyond mere financial fraud. Page after page flashed by, a blur of numbers, cryptic abbreviations, and locations ranging from Zurich to Singapore. Elias felt the pressure of the time constraint pressing down on him, urging him to hurry. He could hear the distant, barely audible change in the city noise outside, a reminder that the world was still turning, oblivious to the high-stakes game being played inside this silent room. His gaze finally landed on an entry, marked not with a date, but with a unique stylized symbol that only he and Volkov had ever used. A stylized serpent coiled around an hourglass. It was their old operational insignia, reserved for the highest level, most sensitive projects, the very project that had led to the betrayal. Beneath the insignia, written in the indelible black ink of a fountain pen, was the name he sought. The very name he had chased across the globe for a decade. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, a surge of vengeful satisfaction that almost buckled his knees. He quickly photographed the page with a microcamera built into his sleeve cuff, capturing the damning evidence instantly and securely. The journal itself, the physical artifact, was now redundant, but he kept it open on the page, letting the reality of his success sink in. This was not just a record of transactions. It was a confession, a smoking gun written in the traitor's own hand. The long, agonizing hunt was over. He had the proof. The next step was to make Volkov pay for every single day of those 10 lost years. Elias carefully closed the journal, placing it back exactly where he found it, maintaining the illusion of the undisturbed sanctum. The hunt was done, but the execution had yet to commence. The name scrawled in Volkov's hand, now digitized and secured in Elias's possession, was the final devastating confirmation. It tied Volkov not just to the incident 10 years ago, but to the shadowy network that had orchestrated it. The man, Viktor Volkov, a massive, imposing figure who now hid behind his wealth, was once a phantom himself, a ruthless operative, a former paramilitary leader from the unforgiving, desolate regions of Eastern Europe. He had not just lurked in the shadows, he had owned them. Elias's mind involuntarily slipped back to the moment of betrayal, a memory so corrosive that he usually kept it locked in an iron cage. It was the winter of that fateful year, a night identical to this one in its cold, crystalline stillness. They were supposed partners, bound by blood oaths and shared ideology, building an empire that was meant to change the world, or at least redistribute its power. Instead, Volkov had chosen greed. Volkov didn't just walk away. He systematically and ruthlessly dismantled everything Elias held dear. The operation they had built, the entire structure of their influence, was ceded to a rival organization. But far worse, Volkov had ensured that the blame for the resulting catastrophe fell squarely on Elias. He had been framed, his reputation scorched, his vast financial holdings seized, and his identity erased from the system. Elias Vance, the prodigy of international finance and black operations, became nothing more than a ghost, a myth whispered in cautionary tones. Volkov had taken everything. The word echoed in the silence of the luxurious study, heavy and absolute. It was not just the money, the 10 years of forced exile and constant vigilance, the loss of his standing. Volkov had orchestrated an incident that, while targeting Elias's operation, had collateral damage that included the life of Elias's wife. That was the ultimate catalyst. The line crossed that transformed business rivalry into a religious quest for vengeance. Elias stared at the faint reflection of his own severe face in the dark glass of a display cabinet. He looked like an empty shell, impeccably dressed, but hollowed out by the necessity of survival and the singular focus on retribution. The 10 years had been a grinding, relentless march toward this room. He had lived under assumed identities, worked the edges of the dark web, gathered intelligence, and accumulated enough power and resources to penetrate Volkov's defenses. Every move was calculated, every alliance temporary, every risk a necessary sacrifice. The thought of payback burned bright and clean in his mind. It wasn't the crude, visceral thirst for simple murder that drove him. That would be too quick, too merciful for a man like Volkov. No, the payback had to be elegant, comprehensive, and utterly ruinous. The journal, with its meticulous records of the 70 billion Vietnamese dong transactions and the network of shell companies, was the perfect weapon. It would not only destroy Volkov's financial empire, but also implicate him in crimes so vast and morally repugnant that even his powerful allies would be forced to abandon him. Volkov would be left with nothing, the very state he had condemned Elias to for the last decade. Elias felt a surge of cold, hard satisfaction. The hunt had been an act of faith, a decade-long prayer whispered in the darkness. Now the prayer was being answered. He stood perfectly still, allowing the raw, tectonic shift of emotion to pass. He had spent 10 years preparing to kill this man, but now he realized the true victory was not the death of a body, but the systematic obliteration of a legacy. Volkov was about to learn that taking everything from someone creates an unstoppable, self-sustaining machine fueled entirely by focused hate. Elias was that machine, and its programming was simple. Now is the time for payback. The financial implications recorded in the journal were staggering. Elias flipped back to the index page, confirming the totals he had photographed. The columns of figures, denoted by various international codes, all converged on a single grand total that represented the sheer scale of Volkov's current criminal operation. The number, stated clearly in one of the journal's initial summaries, represented illicit cash flow, over 70 billion Vietnamese dong. This wasn't just a number. It was a testament to the depth of Volkov's infiltration into global markets and his contempt for human life. The sum was associated with transactions ranging from illegal arms procurement and human trafficking to the destabilization of fledgling economies. Elias knew that this journal was far more potent than a bomb. A bomb kills one man. This journal would kill his network, his power structure, and his reputation in one catastrophic, cascading collapse. He ran his fingers over the faint indentation of the pages, recognizing Volkov's habit of using specific, untraceable pens, the ink designed to resist chemical alteration. The documentation was meticulous, cross-referenced with bank routing numbers and coded references to high-level political figures in 3 different continents. The sheer volume of the crimes was breathtaking. Volkov had not just stolen money, he had stolen national stability, human freedom, and the futures of thousands. The phrase, "This was irrefutable evidence," played repeatedly in Elias's mind, a mantra of confirmation. This journal provided the final concrete link needed to connect Volkov's shadowy existence to the legitimate financial world he used as a shield. It provided proof of intent, proof of action, and most critically, proof of the ultimate beneficiary. This small, humble book held the power to collapse entire institutions. Elias took a moment to analyze his extraction plan for the evidence. While the original goal was to destroy Volkov, the secondary goal was to use this data to dismantle the organization that had backed him 10 years ago. He had already secured digital copies, encrypted and segmented across 3 separate, untraceable servers. The physical journal itself was now a secondary concern, a MacGuffin that served only to lure Volkov's attention. The weight of the journal felt immense, not physically, but ethically. This was the Ledger of the Damned, the book that documented decades of human misery and corruption, totaling more than 70 billion Vietnamese dong in ill-gotten gains. Elias felt a brief, chilling wave of realization. Holding this book made him the most dangerous man in the city. He possessed the power to initiate a global financial and political reckoning. He closed the journal, placing it back on the desk next to the safe. He hesitated for a long, agonizing moment, the temptation to take it, to keep the physical proof as a trophy, warring with the clinical logic of his plan. No, the journal was a trap, a decoy. Its presence here, once discovered, would create confusion, forcing Volkov's remaining allies to chase a dead end while Elias utilized the digital copies. He left it, letting it lie like a viper waiting to strike its next victim. He returned his attention to the USB drives. These were the keys to Volkov's current digital cryptocurrency wallets. While the journal documented the past, these drives held the present. He deftly inserted a specialized copying device, mirroring the contents of all 3 drives in less than 90 seconds. The process was silent, clinical, and complete. He removed the drives, replacing them exactly as he found them. The final phase of his mission was approaching, the confrontation. Volkov was due back any minute. Elias moved silently away from the desk, melting into the deepest shadow near the room's entrance. The sheer scale of the corruption, the 70 billion dong, was now a cold, empowering weight in his mind, justifying every extreme measure he was about to take. He was ready to face the specter of his past and ensure the final chapter of this long war was written in Volkov's blood or his ruin. He tightened his grip on the silenced sidearm hidden beneath his jacket. The air was thick with expectation. The silent anticipation that had defined the last 20 minutes was shattered by a sudden, sharp intrusion. Suddenly, a gunshot ripped through the oppressive silence of the study. It was a distinctive sound, muffled and tight, indicating the use of a high-quality suppressor, not a cheap device, but a professional-grade attachment designed for absolute discretion. Elias, despite his years of training and psychological hardening, froze for a microsecond. The sound originated not from within the room, and certainly not from his own position, but from the immediate exterior, somewhere adjacent to the main window, or perhaps the balcony beyond. His mind, however, reacted instantly, processing the sonic data. The caliber was small, likely 9mm, and the low-velocity signature suggested a close-quarters engagement. This realization was a seismic shift in the entire operation. Elias was expecting Volkov, perhaps accompanied by 1 or 2 bodyguards. He was prepared for a staged confrontation, a monologue of vengeance, followed by controlled elimination. He was not prepared for an external party, operating with the same level of lethal, calculated efficiency. He pressed himself deeper into the shadow, becoming one with the dark wood paneling, his senses screaming a warning. Who else knew Volkov was vulnerable tonight? Who else was playing this highly specialized, high-stakes game? He shifted his weight, rotating his head slowly, his eyes scanning the room for the source of the interruption. His plan, his meticulously constructed edifice of revenge spanning 10 years, was now subject to an unforeseen variable. He held his breath, listening intently. There was no immediate alarm, no shouted response from the house staff, no sequence of return fire. The single clean shot had done its job: elimination and silence. This indicated a skilled, solitary operator, someone who understood the logistics of wet work and discretion. It raised a terrifying possibility. Was Volkov already inside, and was he the target of the gunshot? Elias quickly reached an internal conclusion. The situation had escalated. The game had just gone from a solo hunt to a triangulation. He pulled his own silenced P320 from its shoulder holster, the weight of the firearm instantly comforting. He positioned the weapon, aiming at the entry door, his fingers resting lightly on the trigger guard. He took another slow, controlled breath, the scent of stale air and old cigars temporarily overridden by the sharper scent of gun oil and adrenaline. His priority shifted instantly from securing the evidence, which was already done, to surviving the unexpected confrontation. He had spent 20 years cultivating patience, but the last 10 had taught him that the world rarely respects a well-made plan. The universe, it seemed, enjoyed chaos. He waited, a statue of coiled energy. The post-shot silence was heavy, charged with residual violence. The single bullet had been a period mark on the sentence of Volkov's life. But it also marked the beginning of a new, unexpected chapter for Elias. The silence stretched. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, an eternity in the confined space of the study. He maintained his focus on the door, anticipating a frontal assault, when his peripheral vision caught a flash of movement near the window. The intruder was not coming through the front door. The plot thickened, the shadow moved, and the game changed entirely. The movement was too fast, too fluid to be accidental. A shadow moved. A slender figure, impossibly graceful, appeared in the aperture of the French doors leading to the balcony, the location where Elias had heard the faint, suppressed report. The figure didn't simply walk in. She seemed to detach herself from the night sky, landing silently on the plush carpet with the lightness of a falling leaf. The intruder was female, judging by the height and build, but her presence was all lethal intent. She was completely covered, cloaked in a tactical black suit made of lightweight, sound-absorbing material. Her face was obscured by a dark, non-reflective mask that covered everything but her eyes. Eyes that moved with the rapid, calculating intelligence of a predator. The immediate threat assessment was high. Her posture indicated advanced training, far beyond that of a typical mercenary. She held a weapon in her hands, a short firearm equipped with a massive professional-grade suppressor. The weapon was held in a ready position, low and centered, a testament to her familiarity with high-risk environments. This was the source of the single clean shot. Elias held his position, maintaining absolute stillness. He was a master of silent observation, and he let her scan the room first, allowing her to register the empty space, the open safe, and the general air of intrusion. Her eyes swept over the desk, the scattered papers, the open safe, and finally, they landed on the corpse. The body of Volkov, which Elias had not yet seen, was slumped in an armchair near the fireplace, confirming the efficiency of the intruder's work. Volkov's massive frame was eerily still, the life drained out by the single, well-placed shot. The bounty hunter hadn't bothered with the traditional method of waiting. She had taken the target out immediately upon entry, a move that spoke of cold professionalism and lack of sentimentality. The woman moved toward the body, her gait a silent, economical glide. She wasn't checking for vital signs. She was checking for evidence of the kill. She confirmed the result, then turned her attention to the rest of the room. Her eyes, magnified slightly by the aperture of the mask, came to rest on Elias's location. She didn't flinch, didn't hesitate, but her movement subtly stalled. She knew he was there. The silence between them was not empty, but thick with mutual, lethal respect. She raised the firearm slightly, pointing it directly into the shadow where Elias stood. Her finger remained off the trigger, an indication that she was negotiating, not immediately engaging. Elias remained motionless, a silent counter-threat. He could see the faint dark glint of the short firearm, the suppressor making the weapon look disproportionately large. He had been prepared to kill Volkov, but now he was faced with an unexpected, skilled opponent, or possibly an unexpected partner. The fact that she hadn't fired a second shot, despite knowing his location, suggested she was analyzing the situation, trying to understand his role in the pre-existing chaos. They were two highly trained operatives who had just stumbled onto the same target, at the same moment. The absurdity of the situation was almost comical, yet the stakes were deadly serious. Elias had to make a decision, engage the threat or attempt communication. Given the complexity of the mission and the fact that Volkov was already dead, her success was his success, engagement seemed pointless. He slowly lowered his weapon by a fraction, a small universal gesture of non-aggression. He waited for her response, the slender figure, standing over the corpse of their shared enemy, framed by the chaos of the night. The slight lowering of his P320 was the only acknowledgement Elias offered. The slender figure, still shrouded in her tactical black, registered the gesture. She didn't lower her weapon, but her stance relaxed minutely, the tension bleeding out of her shoulders. She was still a threat, but a calculating one. Then, Elias moved his head, allowing the faint light from the moon filtering through the window curtains to catch the exposed skin around his eyes. It was a deliberate action, a choice to reveal enough to be recognized, but not enough to compromise his position, and in that moment, in the oppressive silence over the dead body of Viktor Volkov, the veil of professional anonymity snapped. He recognized her. His memory, razor-sharp and unforgiving, instantly recalled the scene. It was a damp, moody evening, the air thick with the promise of rain, on the 25th of October, 2025. Exactly a year ago, minus 3 days. The location was a discreet, high-end bar tucked away in the basement of a nondescript building in a neutral European capital, a place where deals were made and secrets were exchanged in hushed tones. She had been wearing an entirely different disguise then, a stunning midnight blue dress, her hair pulled back severely, and her demeanor a practiced blend of icy aloofness and sharp-edged interest. He had approached her not for pleasure, but for information, recognizing the subtle, almost imperceptible signs of a highly specialized operator. She hadn't given him the information, but she had given him a warning, delivered with a voice like fine-grained sand, smooth yet abrasive. He recalled the conversation in minute detail. He was looking for a lead on Volkov's financial movements. She was looking for a contract on a powerful rival. They traded pleasantries and veiled threats, circling each other like two highly intelligent sharks. The moment was defined by the raw, crackling chemistry between them, not romantic, but a mutual respect for the other's capacity for violence and intellect. He had asked her who she was. Her answer was cryptic and cold. "I'm the person who cleans up the messes others leave behind." She was a bounty hunter. The confirmation settled in his mind, explaining everything. She wasn't an assassin hired by Volkov's rivals for political gain. She was a professional, likely hired by a legitimate entity, a disgruntled government, an insurance conglomerate, or perhaps even a rival cartel seeking to settle a debt owed by Volkov. This explained the precision, the quick, silent kill, and the lack of chaos. Bounty hunters valued results and discretion above all else. The realization brought a sense of grim satisfaction. He wasn't the only one seeking Volkov's final reckoning. He had been driven by personal vengeance, while she was driven by a contract likely worth tens of millions of dollars, or perhaps even higher, given Volkov's net worth. A net worth built on the 70 billion Vietnamese dong mentioned in the journal. The woman shifted her weight again, and now, perhaps sensing his recognition, she moved her hand towards the mask, hesitating only slightly. The movement was slow, deliberate, a test. Elias waited. He knew the terms of their silent contract. They were no longer rivals, but accidental partners in the aftermath of a shared objective. The man who had ruined Elias's life 10 years ago, the man responsible for the death of his wife, was now inert, a heavy, silent testament to their accidental alliance. The bounty hunter had solved the problem of Volkov's existence. Elias, however, had the journal, the evidence needed to solve the greater problem of Volkov's legacy. They were complementary forces, two halves of a lethal equation. The atmosphere in the room, thick with the scent of death and expensive cigars, solidified into a fragile, silent equilibrium. The bounty hunter did not remove her mask, but she lowered her firearm completely, resting the heavy, suppressed weapon against her thigh. It was a decisive, unambiguous gesture. Elias, in turn, relaxed his stance, allowing the tension to drain from his shoulders, though his hand remained near the butt of his weapon. Two people looked at each other in a fleeting moment. It was a gaze that lasted perhaps only 3 seconds, yet in that condensed span of time, a complex dialogue was conducted and concluded without a single word being exchanged. Elias's eyes conveyed a cold, assessing respect and a question. "Why are you here?" Her eyes, bright and utterly devoid of fear, returned an answer of pure professional indifference and an acknowledgement. The job is done. The understanding that passed between them was not based on trust or affection, but on shared, lethal competence. They both recognized the hallmarks of a highly specialized operative, the silent entry, the flawless execution, the minimal trace, the focus on the primary objective. More importantly, they shared a crucial piece of knowledge. Their objective, now lying motionless on the floor, was one and the same. Volkov's body, heavy and silent in the armchair, served as the centerpiece of their impromptu alliance. For the bounty hunter, the contract was fulfilled. For Elias, the personal vendetta was concluded. The practical implications of this were immediate and complex. They had both committed an act of homicide in the same room, yet neither was responsible for the other's presence. They were co-conspirators by sheer ridiculous chance. The woman pointed her chin toward the open safe, then back at the journal sitting innocently on the desk, a silent inquiry about the evidence. Elias shook his head once, a decisive negative. He used his eyes to signal that the data was secured elsewhere, communicating that the physical artifact was not the prize. He had what he needed. She understood the signal instantly. The physical chaos was now a distraction, a narrative they could leave behind for the authorities to chase. They were done with this room. The silence returned, but it was no longer heavy with anticipation. It was charged with the urgency of departure. Every second they lingered increased the probability of encountering the returning security patrol. Or worse, Volkov's personal team, who would be far more skilled and ruthless than the contracted guards. They had successfully navigated the static security. They now faced the dynamic threat. The bounty hunter nodded once, a crisp final agreement. She turned, her movement a swift, powerful economy of motion, heading back toward the shattered French doors she had used for entry. She paused only to glance at Elias, a silent command for him to follow. The unspoken agreement was complete. Volkov was dead. The mission was complete. The immediate priority was escape. Elias moved from the shadow, retrieving his silenced sidearm and tucking it back into his holster. He cast a final, long look at Volkov's body. The sight offered no spiritual catharsis, only a cold sense of closure. The 10 years of grinding labor had come down to this. He had promised revenge, and through the hand of another, he had received it. He grabbed the small, heavy flashlight, switching it off and replacing it in his pocket. The room returned to near absolute darkness, dominated only by the faint reflection of the streetlights outside. The partnership, accidental and volatile, had been forged. The transition from the oppressive silence of the study to the relative noise of the outside world was jarring. Following the bounty hunter, Elias moved swiftly toward the shattered French doors. They were two highly disciplined shadows, moving in a coordinated sequence that spoke of inherent tactical synchronicity. They abandoned the journal in the chaotic room. The bounty hunter paused briefly, looking back at the open safe, the untouched journal, and the body of Volkov, a tableau of confusion they intentionally left behind. The mess was the perfect cover, a way to muddy the waters and make the inevitable police investigation chase the wrong motives and the wrong evidence. Elias knew the digital copies of the 70 billion Vietnamese dong transactions were safe. The physical journal was merely an anchor. The jump from the second-floor balcony was clean, executed with practiced ease. The bounty hunter used a grappling line, retracting it instantly while Elias used a silent, specialized decelerator attached to his belt, allowing him to absorb the impact of the fall silently, landing on the soft, wet earth of the garden beds. The air outside was fresher, cleaner, carrying the scent of night-blooming jasmine and damp soil, a sharp contrast to the stale, smoky air of Volkov's vice den. They moved across the manicured grounds, maintaining a wide berth from the main security cameras and following a path through the dense, protective foliage that Elias had scouted earlier. The bounty hunter led the way now, her movements instinctive and precise. Elias observed her, noting her confidence and her absolute lack of unnecessary motion. She was a professional of the highest order, operating with an economy of energy that matched his own. Their immediate extraction point was a secondary street, a quiet residential cul-de-sac away from the main road and the primary security checkpoint. As they approached the high perimeter wall, a low, guttural growl reached their ears. It was the sound of a powerful engine, already warmed and ready. Outside, the black sports car was waiting. It was a vehicle that spoke volumes about the resources of the man Elias had become. A highly modified Aston Martin Vantage, its low profile and matte black finish perfect for nighttime operations. The engine was a quiet, relentless purr, a predator waiting for its prey. The most critical detail, the engine had already been running, a calculated risk Elias had taken, relying on the sound-dampening qualities of the vehicle and the distraction of the remote location. The bounty hunter reached the car first, smoothly opening the passenger door. She didn't hesitate, sliding into the leather seat and instantly securing her suppressed weapon. Elias followed, his hand checking the rearview mirrors for any immediate pursuit. He slid into the driver's seat, the heavy, expensive leather molding to his form, the scent of the interior a welcome, familiar smell after the stale air of Volkov's study. He glanced at his new, accidental passenger. In the faint glow of the dashboard, he could see the contours of her face beneath the mask, the slight tension in her jaw. She was focused entirely on the road ahead, professional until the very last second. He didn't offer a word of thanks. Words were meaningless between them now. The shared act of homicide and the mutual agreement on evidence disposal were acknowledgement enough. He put the car in gear, the transmission shifting with a barely perceptible click. The time for silent retreat was over. The time for speed had begun. Elias pressed down on the accelerator. The highly tuned engine of the black sports car responded instantly, a massive surge of controlled power shoving him back into the seat. He felt the rapid, intoxicating G-force as he tore away from the curb. He accelerated, flung into the night. The mansion, the body, the stolen journal, and the 10 years of obsession instantly receded, becoming nothing more than a rapidly dwindling point in his rearview mirror. The speed was an immediate, physical release, a catharsis that the death of Volkov had failed to provide. The rush of air outside the windows was the only sound now, a white noise replacing the oppressive silence of the study. He navigated the quiet, winding streets with practiced ease, his focus absolute, his hands steady on the steering wheel. He drove not randomly but along a pre-programmed, high-speed escape route designed for maximum anonymity and rapid dispersal into the city's complex network of avenues. He spared another glance for the bounty hunter. She was already removing her mask and hood, revealing a severe dark profile and eyes that were still assessing the environment. Her hair, dark as midnight, spilled out. She was no longer a shadow, but a tangible flesh-and-blood companion in this final, dangerous leg of the mission. She caught his gaze, and for the first time, a flicker of something that was almost amusement crossed her lips. A wry acknowledgement of the absurdity of their situation. She spoke, her voice low and composed, a slight European accent detectable beneath the smooth delivery. "You left the trophy." Elias focused on the road, the streetlights flashing over his face. "Trophies are heavy. I took the architecture." He was referring to the digitized financial data, the true weapon. He paused, then added, "You had the contract." "Why the risk of another operator?" "The contract specified a clean termination. You complicated the clean part, but simplified the termination." She shifted, turning fully toward him. "You took the 70 billion dong, didn't you?" "I took the proof of it," Elias corrected. "And the proof of the conspiracy that destroyed my life 10 years ago." She nodded slowly. "Personal business. Mine was strictly commercial. That makes us both highly motivated and now highly exposed." She looked back at the receding cityscape. "What now?" Elias allowed himself a thin, almost invisible smile, the first genuine expression on his face in years. The immediate relief of Volkov's death was already fading, replaced by the strategic excitement of the next phase. Volkov was merely the head of one serpent. The journal contained the coordinates of the entire nest, the organization that had used Volkov as a pawn, and had been complicit in the death of Elias's wife. He pressed the accelerator harder, the car singing as it crossed the speed limit, merging onto the wider, emptier highway. The lights of the city spread out before them, a vast, glittering expanse of opportunity and danger. He had spent 20 years training, 10 years hunting. Now the roles were reversed. He was no longer the prey, but the definitive hunter. He looked at the woman beside him, a skilled, dangerous, and completely unforeseen ally. She was the one who had finished the first chapter, and now, she was present for the beginning of the second. His final thought, a cold, hard, definitive statement, echoed in the racing silence of the car, the roar of the engine drowning out the ghosts of the past. He knew the game had just begun. The game was no longer about revenge. It was about survival, power, and the systematic dismantling of a global network. And this time he wasn't playing alone. The road ahead was long, fraught with danger, and illuminated by the faint shared light of two damaged souls accelerating into the vast, indifferent night. The black sports car was a solitary vessel on a dark sea, and the journey to justice, or perhaps simply to the next confrontation, was only just starting. He tightened his grip on the wheel, preparing for the endless complications that lay ahead. The night was vast, and the targets were numerous. The game had truly, irrevocably begun.